Howdy guys, it's Mr. Creighton.
Hi Felicia, it's Mrs. Klein. We are here with your first podcast for our unit on the Americas. This is in Chapter 11, Lesson 1, and it's entitled Geography and Agriculture in Mesoamerica. In this lesson, you guys, we're going to learn about the geography of Mesoamerica and how this geography shaped the lives of the people who lived there. Okay, as always, there are vocabulary terms that you're responsible for. We got a lot of them this unit, so you're going to want to make sure that you're solid and squared away on what these mean. They are Mesoamerica, Yucatan Peninsula, elevation, slash and burn agriculture, mace, and cacao. And when you hear this sound, you know you've heard a vocabulary term in the podcast.
Since we're starting a new unit, we've got a new big idea, and that big idea is civilizations across time and space share similar characteristics. We also have a few essential questions we'll be looking at. First, are we all more the same or different across continents?
Okay, second question, how do people adapt to their environment and advance civilization?
The third, what are the characteristics of a civilization?
Next, how does geography influence the history of civilizations?
And finally, how do the roles of and responsibilities of nobles and commoners differ in ancient societies? Our first section we'll be looking at is landforms of Mesoamerica. You can find this on pages 367 to 368. The question you guys should be thinking about as you're listening and following along, what landforms are found in Mesoamerica? Mesoamerica includes the southern part of Mexico and much of Central America. Mountains run down the center of Mesoamerica. In the north, the mountain range divides in two. A region called the Mexican Plateau separates these two highland areas. Coastal plains wind along the Pacific Ocean, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. Here and there, the plains widen into broad lowlands. One such area is the Yucatan Peninsula, which stretches into and divides the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico.
Volcanoes have changed the landscape of Mesoamerica. When a volcano erupts, it spits out streams of lava or melted rock. It also releases clouds of ash. In time, the lava and ash build up. Eventually, they form huge cone-like mountains. More than a dozen of these Mesoamerican volcanic mountains are still active. That means that they can erupt at any time. Most have been dormant or inactive for hundreds of years, though. All right, you should be able to answer this question, you guys. What is the landscape like in Mesoamerica?
All right, guys, our next section is climate and vegetation. You can find this on page 368. The question you guys should be thinking about, how do climates vary in Mesoamerica? Much of Mesoamerica lies in the tropics. Generally, the climate there are hot and wet. The heat and moisture gives rise to rainforests. Many different kinds of trees and plants grow there. Less rain falls in lowland areas. As a result, the lowlands are covered with grasslands.
Northern Mesoamerica has a hot, dry climate. Much of this area is covered with grasslands. Some parts of the north get so little rain that they are considered a desert.
Elevation, or the height of the land above sea level, has a strong influence on climate in Mesoamerica. As elevation rises, the climate grows cooler. Growing conditions change as climate changes. The question you guys should be able to answer in your head right now, what is the link between elevation and climate?
All right, the next section in this particular podcast and this lesson is Geography Shapes Mesoamerican Life. Please be following along in your book, and you can do that on pages 369 to 371, and be thinking of this question as you listen. How has geographic diversity affected the natural resources and crops that are found in Mesoamerica? The highlands of Mesoamerica supplied jade and obsidian. Obsidian is a black volcanic glass. Mesoamericans made small carvings from jade. They made sharp weapons from obsidian. Coastal regions provided seashells and shark's teeth. Mesoamericans used these for jewelry.
Mesoamericans also made use of the animals found in the region. They prized the colorful feathers of a bird called the quetzal. The quetzal was sacred to many Mesoamericans. They often used the feathers from these birds to decorate their clothing.
Mesoamericans farmed all kinds of land. Floodplains of rivers and the slopes of volcanic mountains had fertile soil. As a result, these lands were good for growing crops. Other areas, such as rainforests, were not good for growing crops. To work these lands, Mesoamericans used a method called slash and burn agriculture. Farmers cleared the land by cutting down the trees. Then they burned the fallen trees. Next, they used the ashes to fertilize the soil. And finally, they planted crops on the cleared land. After a few years, they left this land and moved on to another part of the rainforest.
Mesoamericans grew a variety of crops, including maize, a type of corn. They also grew beans, peppers, and squash. They used maize to make many types of food. One of these foods was a kind of flatbread called a tortilla. In addition, Mesoamericans raised cacao. Mesoamericans used the beans from this tree to make a chocolate drink.
Sounds good to me.
It does.
All right, Mesoamericans could not get all of the goods they wanted from their local area. Jade and obsidian were found mostly in mountain areas. Seashells came from the coastal areas. Soon, people began to trade their local goods for goods found in other regions.
Mesoamericans traded goods over great distances by water and over land. Using dugout canoes, they traveled the rivers in the region. They also traveled along the Pacific, Caribbean, and Gulf coasts. The Mesoamericans did not develop the wheel. Also, there were no horses or oxen to use as pack animals. Even so, the Mesoamericans still carried on an overland trade. They did this by carrying the goods on their backs.
More than goods traveled along the trade routes. Traders also carried knowledge with them. That should sound pretty familiar to you guys. It's been kind of a common or recurring theme in many of the cultures that we've studied.
Yeah.
This knowledge spread all over the region. This sharing of ideas helped to create a common culture throughout Mesoamerica. Right now, you should be able to answer this question: how did the geography of Mesoamerica encourage trade?
Just a reminder, you guys are going to have a vocab podcast quiz on this coming up pretty soon. And the terms are Mesoamerica, Yucatan Peninsula, elevation, slash and burn agriculture, maize, and cacao.
All right, you guys, goodbye forever.
You're dead to me.
Not really. We'll see you again soon.